to our Truly Great Reads program. Tonight we will present books about games. My name is Wendy, and I will be joined this evening by reference librarians Sue, Anne, and Lauren in presenting some intriguing books to you. Researching books for this topic generated some interesting discussions among us. What is a game? Is a crossword puzzle a game? Should we talk about economic game theory? Thankfully, the answer was no to that query. What about mind games and psychological warfare? Part of what made our quest challenging and fun was choosing just a few titles from our diverse collection of materials about games. We have books on the Olympic Games, sports of all sorts, war games, board games, and card games. You can find how-to books, histories, inspirational stories, and even a book on how to stimulate your cat's brain with games. We librarians would love to help you find just the right book for your interests. Well, enough of the introduction. Let the games begin. When choosing a nonfiction book to read, I generally look for materials that I classify as encyclopedic, sort of a collection of nonfiction short stories, rather than a novelesque narrative nonfiction. With these types of books, I can skip around reading the chapters that interest me. Oliver Roeder organizes 7 games in such a manner. He looks at 7 parlor games that he feels are representative of human intelligence, listing them in ascending order of strategic skills. The games are checkers, chess, Go, backgammon, poker, Scrabble, and bridge. Roeder starts each chapter with a descriptive and thought-provoking quotation. He draws from literary and academic notables and Pete Rose. Next, he gives a cultural history of the games. Roeder provides interesting and often humorous anecdotes about devotees of the pastimes. We see a parade of luminaries from Socrates to the Cubist, to the artist Marcel Duchamp, known for his Cubist painting Nude Descending a Staircase and his Dadaist sculpture of a urinal, and his obsession with chess. And that's James Bond, not Roger Moore. Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. And do we have any Jeopardy fans listening? Do you recognize this man? He's James Holzhauer, a professional poker player who's one of the winningest contestants on the game show. Interestingly, Holzhauer is mentioned in 7 games, but not the poker section. The author provides an overview of the rules and strategies of the game. The reader experiences the gamut from the elegant purity of Go to the sweaty desperation of poker. But what makes this book particularly fascinating is the overarching narrative of the effect of computers on these games, especially during a time in which we debate the ethics of ChatGPT. Roeder has a PhD in economic game theory. Well, that topic did sneak in the back door of this presentation, and studied artificial intelligence as a Nieman Fellow at Harvard. His fascination with this area of study shows as he recounts how programmers have used games to teach machines to think more like people. The sheer information crunching ability of computers has allowed machines to learn by the vast number of times the programs can try out the variables of a game. The author provides interesting factoids to illustrate these numbers. For example, there are 500 billion, that's 500 followed by 18 zeros, chess positions possible. If the Pacific Ocean was a dry bed, it would take that many small cups of water to fill the area. Or there are 35 billion, that's 35 followed by 27 zeros, possible deals of a single bridge hand. This number exceeds the number of stars in the universe. Roeder writes of the pivotal tournaments between masters of the various games and machines in nail-biting detail. AI has solved 6 of the 7 games in this book and has also changed the way that people play each other. Which game is yet unsolved, you may well ask? Read 7 games to find out. This is undisputedly my favorite nonfiction book that I have read in the last couple of years, if not decade. I was drawn to the second book I'm presenting, Of Dice and Men by David Ewalt, because of its punny title and the fact that my son plays D&D, or Dungeons and Dragons to those of us who are not up with what is popular in the nerd world. Perhaps you have a child or a grandchild who participates in RPGs. That's role-playing games. See what I've done? You've already dipped your toe into this world with these 2 abbreviations and would like to know more about the pastime as I did. Even if you don't know a D&Der, this is an interesting book about a passionate segment of society. Ewalt has written an apologetic love letter to an obsession that he rediscovered in adulthood. Dungeons and Dragons is an offshoot of miniature battle reenactments. In the mid-1970s, 2 men, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, independently took the concept of reenactment and freed it from the constraints of historical accuracy. They introduced the use of fantasy tropes to create new adventures. In doing so, they changed how games are played. With this radical shift, D&D started to permeate our culture. The game has been referenced in popular television shows, sometimes serving as a recurring plot device. The creators of D&D have their own miniature figurines, a nod to the soldier figurines of the game's precursors. And these 2 men are so embedded in nerd culture that Gygax voiced an animation of himself on the series Futurama. Ewald explains the basics of D&D, including character tropes. You can be a changeling rogue or an elven bard. You can be chaotic good or lawful evil. The author identifies as a level 15 cleric. What the players of a game need is to develop a merry band of characters who are diverse enough to triumph over the challenges of the quest, which generally begins at a tavern. To help in creating a successful team, the creators came up with an alignment matrix to evaluate qualities of the individuals. This tool has become embedded in nerd culture and is often used to evaluate characters from worlds other than D&D. Here is an example of one defining TV and movie characters. Countless hours have been spent debating Batman's location on this matrix. For those of you who are curious, I have included a link on the bottom of this slide to an online test that you can take to evaluate where you fall on the grid. During a weekly telephone call, my family and I took the test. I'm happy to say that no one was evil. Of Dice and Men also is a business case study. Pictured here are the major players in the corporate drama. That's Gary Gygax, David Arneson, the Bloom brothers, and Lorraine Williams. Ewalt follows TSR, originally Tactical Studies Rules, Inc. What an awkward name. From its beginning in Gygax's basement through unbridled corporate spending to an epic power struggle culminating in the company's takeover by the heiress of the Buck Rogers fortune. Did you know there was a Buck Rogers fortune? I didn't. Who were the villains of this saga is still debated today. If you want to learn more about D&D, check out Empire of Imagination by Michael Whitmore or Game Wizards by John Peterson. From differing vantage points, these books examine the dynamics of the creators of the game and their company. What struck me when I finished both 7 games and Of Dice and Men is that both authors seek to answer in very different ways why people play games and why they should play games. Now, next up to bat is Sue.
Thank you, Wendy. For my games books, I chose Books written by two Olympians from two very different countries, one who runs fast and one who swims fast. Both books are new to me, though neither is newly published. The authors each tell an incredibly powerful story. No wonder I fell in love with both. The books took place in different times, places, and situations, but the truths they contain about being true to yourself, your family, your ideals, your goals, no matter what, are universal and memorable. The instant each author saw an Olympic competitor win, each decided their own life goal was to win an Olympic gold medal. Running for My Life, One Lost Boy's Journey from the Killing Fields of Sudan to the Olympic Games by Lopez Lemong is the wonderfully told memoir of Lopepe Lemong, a Sudanese-American Olympic runner whose very name, Lopepe, means fast. Lopepe had never even heard of the Olympics and never knew running was a sport till he accidentally found out when he was 16 years old. Throughout his young life, running was something done to survive. Running was a way to escape. Lopepe grew up in Central Africa in impoverished southern Sudan. When he was just 6 years old, Lopepe's life changed forever when he was wrenched from his mother's arms by a Sudanese rebel fighter, tossed onto the floor of a roasting hot metal trailer truck, and hauled away to the rebels' training grounds with a truckload of other kidnapped children. The older kids were trained to become warriors in the rebels' fight against the government. The younger ones were kept locked indoors behind bars, only fed occasionally, and never ever allowed to go outside for any reason whatsoever. The rebels had no idea what to do with their youngest captives. Many died. Most never saw their families again. But when 3 of the older captive boys invited little Lopepe to run for his freedom with them, he did. Reading his memoir and the horrible circumstances Lopepe endured, first as a prisoner of the Sudanese rebel army, and then as an escapee, running hours and hours through desert days and nights, I mourned for all that this little boy and the thousands of other abducted African children had lost. The world will never know how many young Sudanese died in captivity or attempting to escape. The stolen boys became known as the Lost Boys of Sudan. The lucky ones, like Lopepe, were eventually found by United Nations soldiers. He and other lost boys that the UN soldiers found were bused to an overflowing refugee camp in the Kenyan desert, where he spent the next 10 years of his life. Starvation, neglect, and a myriad of untreated diseases decimated the camp's ever-growing refugee population. Lopepe had no hope, no expectations, and no thought of anything beyond the here and the now. He didn't hear about or wonder about life beyond that dismal desert camp. His only possessions were the raggedy clothes on his back. He didn't even own a pair of shoes, and he never had. But he did love playing soccer and played in the camp every chance he got. This is a relatively modern picture of Lopepe's refugee camp's only soccer field. No grass, no shade, just a designated place in the desert. But Lopepe's refugee campmates did not own nice clothes like these kids do, and did not have a real soccer ball. When Lopepe lived there, the boys made their own soccer balls from rags scavenged from the camp dump. Can you imagine trying to play soccer with a ball made out of rags? Yeah. Because he had always been a very, very fast runner, Lopepe was a great soccer player. But the camp kids had a rule. Any day you want to play soccer, you first have to run all the way around the camp's circumference, an 18-mile circumference. The faster you finished your 18-mile lap, the faster you could join the game. So Lopepe got lots of fast running practice. He wanted to get out on the soccer field as quickly as he possibly could. Then in 2001, in his 10th year at the refugee camp, when Lopepe was 16 years old, something of a miracle occurred. He joined a group of boys heading to a nearby house to see something called an Olympic event. He didn't know what that was. At the house, they each paid a coin to watch one Olympic foot race on the home's tiny black and white television, a sort of pay-per-view arrangement by the owner. LePepe had never even heard of the Olympics. He had never seen a TV, no less a TV broadcast, and never in his wildest dreams had imagined someone could be rewarded for running fast, till he saw track Olympian Michael Johnson win a gold medal for his country. From that time on, a fast succession of more miracles and more firsts, including a new name and a family. The first family he'd ever had since he was kidnapped 10 long years ago. LePepe always put his trust in God. He believed that no matter what happened, God was watching out for him. It truly seemed like he was. He took on a new name, Joseph, and he got the chance to go abroad. And he was flown across the world to meet his new foster family in Albany, New York. It's probably too tiny of a picture, but you can see LePepe on the left and his mom and dad in New York. Knowing nothing about life outside the camp, he had many funny missteps, many misunderstandings, and millions of misconceptions. The results were often hysterical. Reading this book, it was just astonishing to realize this guy had no knowledge of life in normal world. But as an American kid and with a wonderful foster family, LePepe, now Joseph, thrived. He graduated high school right along with his Albany age mates. That's him running for his high school. He became a legendary high school cross-country runner, as you can imagine, an outstanding collegiate star, and ultimately an Olympian. And he was in the 2008 Beijing Olympics. That's him carrying the flag. Quite a remarkable story. His Lopez Lamong Foundation still works to bring education and clean water to rural South Sudanese communities and helps provide other sorts of relief to South Sudan's long-suffering people. Here he is in Chicago, raising money for his native South Sudan. The author's eternal positivity, joy, and strength are just some of the many ways your life will be enriched by reading Running for My Life, One Lost Boy's Journey from the Killing Fields of Sudan to the Olympic Fields by Lopez Lamong. Just as an aside, kind of a personal thing, maybe one thing that made me love this book so much is the fact that my own first son is the exact same age as LePepe and ran for his high school and college teams the same exact years as the author of this book. So when I was reading it, I just kept thinking of what Matt was like at that age. It was nice. My second games book is Butterfly, From Refugee to Olympian, My Story of Rescue, Hope, and Triumph by Syrian swimmer Yusra Mardini. At the time, Yusra and her family lived just outside of Damascus, Syria. It's up at the top there. I didn't mark Damascus, but it's kind of in the middle of Syria. Her dad was a professional hard-nosed swim coach. He was also determined to see his daughter become the world's best swimmer. Mr. Bardini trained Yusra after school 4 days a week in Damascus's Olympic-sized pool. He was driven and obsessive. His coaching style was both relentless and merciless. When Yusra had a perforated eardrum, he'd yell, "Get in the water!" When she had painful stitches in her face, he had no sympathy. "Get in the pool now!" This was Yusra's life ever since she was a young kid. What dad said was law. Syria was a Muslim country, and women obeyed men without question, especially if the man is your father. His will was her life, no questions asked ever. Luckily, his will was to help her become exactly what she wanted, to be the Olympic gold champion in the women's butterfly swim competition. To that end, she was a very hard worker and a devoted, strong swimmer, competing at every possible chance. She swam on several Syrian national swim teams even before she reached high school. In 2011, Arab Spring violence erupted, and life in Arab countries everywhere became disrupted and unpredictable. In Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt, people angry about their government's oppressive policies joined large protests. And even though Syria's rulers were relatively moderate, Damascus too was soon caught up in the spreading violence. Yusra's family heard missile explosions daily. Walking anywhere outside was dangerous. In December 2011 alone, 40 innocent Syrians were killed by one suicide bomber. Friends, family, and neighbors fled, most to Lebanon to the east and Turkey to the north. But Yusra's family stayed. Her dad was in denial. He didn't want to give up all that he had worked for. Then, in 2015, when she was 17 years old, a rocket-propelled grenade crashed through the training pool ceiling and through the water while Yusra was swimming. By some miracle, it did not explode. If it had, there would not have been a book. Yusra's brush with death did not quell her desires to become an Olympic swimmer, but it did give her the idea to get out of Syria ASAP. Her father finally allowed her to go. So Yusra, her sister, and their cousin headed to Europe in 2015, just 1 year before the 2016 Olympics in Rio, where Yusra hoped to compete. It's a little hard to see this map because it wouldn't all fit on my slide, but from Damascus, Syria, at the very, 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 very bottom, up to Berlin, where the trio finally emigrated to, is a long, long, long distance, about 3,000 miles. It's not easy, even in the best of times. The challenging, difficult journey took them on an arduous and dangerous trip, across many borders, often sneaking across because they did not have the required paperwork. The three refugees had to invent it all as they went along: destinations, routes, transportation, almost always without advance tickets, and sometimes with the help of smugglers, and often on foot. I think that picture is actually from a movie that was made of this book in just last year. How in the world did Yusra's courage? Oh, sorry, I forgot to say, once they had to cross a rough sea on a floundering inflatable rubber dinghy with a stalled out engine and no tiller and no way to steer it. And I think that picture is definitely from the movie. How in the world did Yusra's courage, unflagging, can-do spirit, determination enable her to reach her Olympic goal after she lost her pool, her coach, and her country? You definitely want to read Butterfly: From Refugee to Olympian, my story of rescue, hope, and triumph to find out. Today, at 25 years old, Yusra works tirelessly to draw attention to the plight of refugees everywhere. She seeks universal understanding and compassion for these totally normal people who've had to flee from their homelands as she did, many without money, medicine, or food, despite having led a normal and successful life. She became a spokesperson for and competed on the first United Nations Refugee Olympic Team at the Rio 2016 Olympics. The Refugee Olympic Team continues to help draw the world's attention to the plights of refugees around the world. In a myriad of ways, the Refugee Olympic Team helped incredibly capable athletes who can't compete for their own countries due to war, upheaval, and displacement. Yusra Mardini continues to be a featured speaker at many refugee conferences at the United Nations and has even spoken at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Her goal is always to draw attention to the worldwide refugee crisis. She urges all countries to enact the changes that would be necessary to ease the entry, assimilation, education, and access to medicine for the world's 65 million refugees. Last year, Butterfly was made into a Netflix movie called The Swimmers. We hope it will be available on DVD sometime soon, and if it is, you'll surely be able to borrow it from the Rolling Meadows Library. Thank you. My two books were Running for My Life and Butterfly. Check them out. Now, please welcome reference librarian Anne.
Dust Bowl Girls takes its readers back to the 1930s Oklahoma. Oklahoma Presbyterian College for Girls was a small school in a small town near the Texas border. The author, Linda Reeder, recounts the humble beginnings of OPC's girls basketball team and its journey to becoming national tournament champion. She begins by discussing the background and coaching philosophy of the girls' college coach, Sam Babb, who was also the author's great uncle. Coach Babb saw past the Depression era, thinking that sports were unladylike and even physically inappropriate for women and girls. He believed that basketball helped develop critical thinking and good judgment. He also believed that a winning sports team could bring a whole community together and raise spirits battered by the Depression. Babb recruited farm girls from the area to play on his team, offering them a free college education in exchange for their hard work, which included 4 a.m. practices in a gymnasium that was unheated until the caretaker arrived at 5 a.m. His program offered a way for these young women to help themselves and their struggling families. Equal parts social history and sports legends come to life. Dust Bowl Girls reveals the challenges facing serious women athletes of the 1920s and 30s. Reeder describes the rule differences between men's and women's basketball. For one, girls were only allowed 1 dribble below the knee during official games before they had to pass. As she describes it, the women's basketball of the game of the time would have been a completely different game than the one we know now. A good portion of the story describes a barnstorming tour of the South that the team took to raise money for the basketball program, and is where the narrative really comes to life. At this time, most women's teams were sponsored by the company that the women worked for. For instance, Babe Diedrichson, who soon would win 2 Olympic gold medals in track and field, was recruited to work for Employers Casualty Insurance and play for their basketball team. Another team, the Slipper Girls, represented the Dallas Shoe Company. The author's meticulous research is on display here through her play-by-play accounts of the games and the dramatic recounting of the tour. The team bus provided some of the excitement as well. OPC won every game, including one against the reigning champions, Babe Diedrichson's Golden Cyclones. After this successful and thrilling tour, part of an 88-game winning streak, the Oklahoma Presbyterian Cardinals became the first collegiate team to win the American Athletic Union's National Basketball Tournament. This is a hidden gem of a story with appeal to sports fans as well as historians. I would put Dust Bowl Girls right up there with A League of Their Own for a good sports underdog tale. Staying with my historical theme, A Game of Birds and Wolves takes us to 1940s. Maybe your first introduction to war games was the 1983 movie of the same name, but the use of games to represent the maneuvers of warriors on boards can be found throughout history. Archaeologists have unearthed sets of miniatures that represent Sumerian and Egyptian armies. Many board games still played today, like chess and Go, are either military themed or explore military concepts. Games provide an ideal, consequence-free sphere in which to experience war. In A Game of Birds and Wolves, Simon Parkin tells the remarkable story of the role war games played in the British Navy's effort to defeat Germany's U-boat wolf packs and win the Battle of the Atlantic. The first half of the book is devoted to setting up the main players and the stakes. One way Parkin creates tension and reinforces the reality of war is by describing the sinking of the SS City of Benares through the viewpoint of 12-year-old Colin Ryder Richardson, an evacuee on his way to Canada. Parkin introduces members of the Royal Navy's Western Approaches Tactical Unit, engaging the reader with his extensive research and heavy use of flashbacks. He gives us insight into their characters. The WATU included several members of the Women's Royal Naval Service, popularly and officially known as Wrens, and Captain Gilbert Roberts, the leader of the unit. Part of Roberts' somewhat unorthodox career trajectory included being a game designer for the Royal Navy. Roberts' task was threefold: discover the secret of how U-boats operated, develop effective countermeasures, and teach these new tactics to every captain who sailed the Atlantic. The game board, painted on the floor of a room the size of a gymnasium, included canvas sheets positioned to simulate the average visibility from the bridge of a warship and could be adjusted depending on the game scenario based on actual battle conditions. The Wrens, who alongside Roberts ran the games and developed new scenarios and countermeasures, were instrumental to an Allied victory. A discussion of Britain's development of a defense against German U-boats is not complete without a discussion of the development of U-boats themselves and their tactics. Parkin does not disappoint. We get the opponent's side through narratives from General Admiral Karl Donitz, who developed the U-boat's Wolfpack tactic, which was proving incredibly effective in cutting Britain off from food and other supplies. Parkin also includes viewpoints from U-boat captains and crew. Of the 39,000 U-boat crewmen, 70% were killed in action. Compare this to the British Army's death rate of 6%. To quote the author, as they began to realize what they'd signed up to, a kill or be killed mentality hardened in the U-boat crews. Sympathy with the enemy, be they man, woman, or child, could be fatal. Parkin weaves his narrative like a novel, switching back and forth between characters and timelines. He brings this little-known story to light and packs it with colorful trivia. I highly recommend Game of Birds and Wolves to anyone interested in World War II history, especially those interested in women in the military or in naval history. Now I'll pass the ball to Lauren.
Not All Fairy Tales Have Happy Endings by Ken Williams is the first book I'm going to discuss. If you love adventure games, odds are good you played at least one of Sierra's online games. They diversified extensively into education, productivity, simulators, and other software realms. And Ken Williams argues that what made them special was passionate designers and a dedication to marketing. This book is one part biography, one part business, and one part random asides. Ken and Roberta Williams were the founders, and in Roberta's case, one of the major writers of Sierra Online, as might be expected of a company that got its start in 1979 in a niche market. The start is scrappy, and the idealism is high. Ken doesn't hide that his goal from a young age was to do anything he could to make it and make it big, or that he learned to sell a product, newspapers, or his job skills to maximize profits in order to make it happen. It's also a good, quick overview of how fast computing changed. I knew about punch cards and magnetic reels, but the existence of audio cassette software was a bit of a surprise. The range of pictures and their captions definitely add to the book. Although it is mainly a California story, there are a few sections that take place in Illinois. Briefly, but enough to relate Roberta training her boss to respect her job title from the first day. Quote, "I don't know how to make coffee," was the truth, but she followed with the blunt honesty, "and I don't want to learn." They didn't last long, since winter came as a shock, and like many of us, they spent it shoveling snow, scraping ice, and praying the car would start each day. Back they went to a warmer climate. A second Chicago area tale comes from Ken's younger brother, then living out in the Chicagoland suburbs, who got a box of software in a request to go and try to sell it at local computer stores. "I'll give you 25% of the sales," said Ken. Although Ken didn't really have any luck trying to reach his brother before the box arrived, so his brother called their dad to find out what was actually going on. While Ken may be the writer of the book and the one who wound up as the CEO of the eventual company and its subsidiaries, it's clear throughout that Roberta is both the love of his life and someone he regards as equally brilliant and worthy of respect. He notes that early on they settled into a schedule where he would work long hours and multiple jobs during the week, and through half of Saturday sometimes. Then arrange for a babysitter so that he and Roberta could have time to themselves, and then Sunday would be dedicated to family time with their sons. The ups and downs of working in software are the bulk of the book. But another glimpse into the personal comes with the discussion of Roberta's book on Irish immigration to the United States, rooted in her family history, and the epilogue where Ken relates the wedding of their youngest son at the height of the pandemic. At a movie ticket theater window, while they watched from the car. The tale of the company itself involved a lot of adventures, not always of the good kind, since it eventually came out that the company that bought them out engaged in major corporate malfeasance and socked away more money than they really should have, and it went to the courts before everything dissolved. Onwards to our next, which is a lighter tale. Power Play, How Video Games Can Save the World by Asi Barak and Laura Palmer. Though no longer the shiny, new, groundbreaking idea the authors first introduced, the notion that computer games can make a difference has been around for a while. Games for Change, the organization that supported many of the highlighted projects in this book, is now celebrating its 20th anniversary and still finding new games and ways to expand our understanding of the world. At the core of most of these games is finding a way to get people to think differently about a topic or gain empathy. The actual experience ranges wildly. Peacemaker includes the recounting of one of the designers observing an Israeli classroom encounter the game without any framework given, and his realization that his idealistic intent could be wholly disregarded. Well, many of the other accounts include acknowledgments made with hindsight, but the hope that they could inspire change is a constant refrain. Why not? Whether you want to know more about just one of these efforts, like Sandra Day O'Connor's iCivics minigames, intended to help Americans learn more about civics than they might from dry textbooks, or get a general overview of a decade when games and citizen science were finding new pathways, Power Play is a quick read that won't leave you dismayed at the end. American Indian Lacrosse, Little Brother of War by Thomas Venom Jr. delves into a uniquely American game. It developed across the eastern seaboard to down into areas of Mexico, as you can see from the picture that the author provided in the books here. So there is considerable exchange and different styles of play as you go. The sports acceptance at the high school and college level has been spreading for decades. but it remains a vital part of culture and history for those who developed the game. Note that this book from the Smithsonian Press did come out in the 1990s. The author, trained as an ethnomusicologist, originally got into his idea of going into lacrosse by observing the close similarities between a type of Ojibwe drumstick and their lacrosse sticks. He also recorded a number of documentaries, wrote books on various aspects of culture, and supported the development of educational games, all to enhance the understanding of the long and varied histories. He delves into this story by focusing upon a particularly fine Cayuga lacrosse stick carved prior to 1845, clearly treasured without ever being used to play. Noting that it references a number of ritual and ceremonial aspects, and it uses that as a jumping off point to consider both the sport's history and current trajectory. Some chapters focus solely on the recounting of interviews with those who lived the sport in all its incarnations. Some cover the history in various places from various points of view. Some of these are important historical viewpoints, but it helps to remember that A, you don't have to deal with these people yourself, and B, they're long gone. They're not always very nice. Lacrosse has left its mark in many ways. It was declared the national sport of Canada on the day that they founded their dominion. And as the popularity spread, many teams went on tour throughout the US, Canada, and even abroad in the 1860s. While this did have the effect of spreading interest in the sport, the Native American teams were neither treated well nor supported to the same degree, and they were effectively shut out from the white lacrosse world for decades under the guise of being professional teams because they needed to receive a fee in order to cover travel expenses, unlike the wealthier amateur white teams. In addition, many missionaries pushed back against the gambling, drinking, and dancing that had accompanied the games long before they arrived, as well as complaining that games on Sunday took attention and attendance away from services. Meanwhile, you have had several religions emerge over the years, which combine both Native tradition and some aspects of the parts they liked from the missionaries.
The library will be closing in 15 minutes.
Sorry about that. To knit together both the old and the new. You will find that both the equipments and the rules have been transformed, especially in field lacrosse, by the rules set by the white associations. For example, no longer are the majority of the lacrosse sticks there made of wood and leather, but of plastic, which can be rather brutal if those break. In box lacrosse and women's field lacrosse, the wooden sticks are still used by some. It hurts more when you get hit with them, but they're less likely to do piercing damage. Today, the tribe still struggle to receive respect on the field. 1990 marked the first time that a Native American team was invited to officially participate in an international competition. While the 2022 Men's Lacrosse World Games claimed that the Iroquois Nationals, the number 3 team, representing the Haudenosaunee Confederation, could not compete because they were not from, quote, a sovereign nation. After a petition signed by 50,000 people, the organizers admitted their mistake. which is questionable in the first place since the US Constitution recognizes tribal nations as sovereign governments, and the game was set for Birmingham, Alabama. But the organizers also claimed they could do nothing because the roster was already set. The Irish team chose to withdraw in order to allow the Haudenosaunee to compete in their place, recognizing them as one of the founders of the sport. My last book's a quick one. It's called A History of American Sports in 100 Objects by Kate Murphy. It is a delight to flip open, and you're guaranteed to find something unexpected. While it goes year by year, the objects chosen definitely go for a broad range, from the very Cayuga lacrosse stick detailed in my prior book, to 1949's original ice resurfacing machine, to the 2016 Special Olympics medals. Speaking of Special Olympics medals, we do indeed have a connection here in Rolling Meadows. The 2018 Paralympic sled hockey team practiced out of our very own West Meadows. One very consistent thing throughout history is that people love to play games. The forms vary radically: world games, physical games, games that give outlets to learn or practice skills, games that use common items to keep kids busy, card games, board games, video games. Every culture has their own set of games. We hope this interview has inspired you to think more about the games you play, and perhaps inclined you to learn some more about ones you don't. This wraps up our slate of books. Please be aware that we have updated our app, so if you're trying to get in, you might need to update that. Otherwise, this is just a small collection of the books that we have, and we've got lots more. So please come on in, call us, email, however you like. We'd be more than happy to help. Thank you.